The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor you have broken, as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. This is the word of life.
Thanks be to God.
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. That translation of the 6th verse we just read out of the 9th chapter of Isaiah may be more familiar to you, either because you grew up reading from the King James Version, or you have heard what Handel did with verse 6 in his masterwork, The Messiah. Perhaps you were one of the 1,000+ people that were able to be here last Sunday night as our chancel choir and Tulsa Symphony Orchestra performed this great work, Messiah, from Handel. You get to one number, and verse 6 that we just read is the key verse. And one section begins to sing, and another one repeats it. Then they begin to go over and under and around each other as the whole sanctuary fills with their sound. All the while, the violins are driving them to a great crescendo. And then it all calms back down into a beautiful and satisfying conclusion. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. When children are born, they change lives. I don't have sons, but I have a couple of daughters, and I can tell you from personal experience, when children are born, they change lives. They often stir up within the parents and grandparents and friends and relatives images of all the wonderful things that might happen through this child's being born. All the marvelous possibilities of what will occur in the future. Certainly it was that way for Adam and Lauren Maxwell, whose story is told in a fictional account of a story called Christmas Jars by Jason F. Wright. He writes about the Maxwells and how they fell in love and how wonderful their lives were, and then finally conceived a child, and Hannah was born to them, and it was wonderful and certainly changed their lives. But not only her birth, but also something that happened when Hannah was 7 years old. See, the Maxwells had a tradition that throughout the year they would save their change. At the end of each day, they would empty purses and pockets and put all their loose change, and sometimes even the loose dollar bills, into a jar. They called it their Christmas jar. They did that day after day throughout the year. And then the tradition was on Christmas Eve, they would take the jar to the bank and find out how much money they had, and that's what they spent for Christmas gifts on their family that year. Well, this particular year, Hannah was feeling like she was kind of getting all grown up. She was 7 years old. She asked if she could carry the jar. Her parents said, sure. And so here they went from the car toward the bank doors, Hannah following her parents, carrying the jar. But just as they stepped up on the sidewalk, Hannah noticed a woman sitting on the curb crying. Hannah walked over and sat down next to the woman and said, "What's wrong?" no response. She said, "Are you sad?" Still no response. She set the jar down between them and then said, "Hello? Hello?" The woman didn't respond. Any adult would have known the woman was clearly stating she didn't want to talk to anybody. But then Hannah looked at her jar sitting between them and said, "Would you like our Christmas jar?" The woman looked up a little. Little Hannah took her hands and pushed the jar a few inches across the pavement till it was resting against the woman's left leg and said, "Please, take our Christmas jar." It was just about then that her dad realized that little Hannah had not followed him into the bank. He spun around on his heel, burst back out the doors yelling, "Hannah!" He quickly saw her seated on the curb next to the woman he did not recognize. He said, "Are you all right?" She shook her head yes. He moved closer to her and crouched down beside her and said, "What's going on, Hannah?" The woman finally spoke. She said, "Nothing, really, sir, nothing. Your little girl just offered me her jar." The dad tried to figure out quickly what to do. By then, his wife was standing behind him. He turned around and looked at her and kind of shrugged his shoulders without saying a word, kind of asking, "What do you think?" His wife shrugged her shoulders back, but the tears welling up in her eyes gave him his answer. He stood up and looked at the woman and said, "Merry Christmas, ma'am." Took his daughter by the hand. They walked back to the car in silence. They began to drive away. Adam, the father, finally said, "What just happened? Did we just give away Christmas?" His wife quietly said, "We just gave away Christmas." That's what the early Christians saw in this prophecy from Isaiah when they read it. They see God offering us a gift of love in this child that is born unto us, in the Son that is given to us. When they heard the story, they had to make a decision. When Hannah's dad realized what was happening that day on the sidewalk, he had to make a decision. And just like Hannah's dad, we have a choice to make. We have to decide, how will we respond to this gift that's being given to us? Luke tells us of Mary, the mother of Jesus, having a decision to make whether or not she was going to be the mother of this child. Luke tells us in his gospel that Mary decided, you heard it read, that she was willing to serve the Lord in such a way. Luke also told us about the shepherds and how they were scared half to death when this angelic chorus began to sing and tell them of this great good news for all the people, that a baby was being born and that would be the Savior of the world. Luke tells us they decided to go into town to see if they could learn more, to see if they could find this baby that was being born. Matthew's gospel tells us a little different story, but he too tells us about people involved in this birth. He tells us about Joseph and that he had a decision to make about how he was going to participate in this whole experience. And Matthew tells us that Joseph decided to follow the direction of the Lord and trust that all of this had something to do with what God wanted to do for people in the world. Matthew also tells us about those mysterious men from the east who follow a star so that they might come and pay homage to this one that they believe was being born King of the Jews. There are so many other accounts in the gospel stories of people running in to this baby now grown up, this man Jesus, and having to decide, how will we respond? What are we going to do with this gift of love that has been born into the world? We have the same choice to make this evening as we gather once again to hear this ancient story, to hear the proclamation that for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. This is how we heard it in verse 6 and 7. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Can you hear the proclamation? That God has sent us one to embody peace and justice and righteousness and open it up as a gift to the entire world. What will we choose? What will we do in response? Will we open this gift of love and let it flow in and throughout our lives? Will we allow His authority to grow in our lives? I ask about authority because Isaiah's prophecy proclaims authority is the key, that this baby is coming, but the key is that His authority will grow in the lives of those who hear the proclamation. Oh, it's wonderful to come and celebrate the birth of the baby. It's more challenging to open the gift of love from God in such a way that we allow it, maybe even invite it to grow in authority throughout our lives. I think little Hannah and her family had a moment of decision that day on the sidewalk. I think they had a moment of growth where they allowed the authority of Christ to take over their lives, where they could give Christmas away to someone else. I think it was a moment of letting the authority of Christ grow in a new way in their lives. And because it did, they gave Christmas away. They gave Christmas to someone else. The story, Christmas Jars, goes on to tell of the ripple effect of their gift, how it rippled through their lives, and how they began a tradition from that Christmas Eve on to go ahead and fill the jar all year long and then find someone in need and give it away every Christmas Eve, and how that changed lives and how it caught others up in this whole idea of being those who give away Christmas. Miraculous things began to happen in their community because of the authority of Christ growing in their lives. I want to read you just a brief quote that later in the story the dad Adam says to someone else when he's explaining what they're doing. He says, the jar isn't about the money. The money has never been enough to save anyone. But every day we notice the jingling in our pockets and our purses, and that saves us. I guess it's a daily remembrance of sacrifice. I would say it is a daily reminder of the gift. The gift God is giving us in the birth of this child, the gift of unending love, which we remember every year as we celebrate this great good news. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given.